So let's take a minute and talk about some patterns of selection. And we'll first talk about what's called stabilizing selection. This occurs when individuals at the extremes of a range of a characteristic are consistently selected against. Let's talk about the birth weight of babies before modern medicine. If a baby was really, really small, it was probably kind of sickly and might have died of some kind of infection or just lack of development. If a baby was really, really big, that baby might not have been able to be born. It might have been too big to actually get out of its mother. So those babies were selected against. The babies that were selected for by nature were those that were middle-sized. So over time, most babies became or were born middle-sized, like 6 to 7 pounds. Now, things like neonatal care units, things like the C-section, those are changing those patterns. But as far as stabilizing selection goes, it's when nature chooses an intermediate, a middle phenotype as the one best for the environment. There's also directional selection. This one is when individuals at one extreme of the range of a characteristic are selected for, and those in the middle and those on the other extreme are selected against. So this happens a lot when there's a consistent change in an environment. For example, if you were using a certain insecticide on a field, the insects that had some resistance to that insecticide, those would be selected for. And the insects without that resistance, those would be selected against. So that over time, there would be a huge shift in the allele frequencies in the next few generations, and the frequency of the resistance gene would rise quickly and dramatically in that population. There's also what's called disruptive or diversifying selection. This happens when both extremes for a characteristic are selected against, and the intermediate is selected for. This can happen in lots of different places. For example, there are many kinds of insects that feed on leaves of trees. A lot of these have colors that match the leaves they feed on. Suppose that a species of insect ranges in color from light green to dark green, but medium green is the most common. If a particular species of insect had some individuals that fed on plants with dark green leaves, whereas other individuals fed on plants with light green leaves, medium green insects would be selected against, and the two extremes selected for. So here we see some examples. So this top example is showing us stabilizing selection. So we started off with this kind of distribution, but for some reason in this environment, the middle phenotype was selected for. So over time, that phenotype became more and more common, and these phenotypes out here on the extremes became less and less common. With directional selection, the middle one here. Here we're looking at the example of the peppered moth. In the Industrial Revolution, the smoke, the soot from the factories got all over the trees, made the trees darker than they normally would. So dark moths, which had been rare before the Industrial Revolution, they were selected for. The normal phenotype, which is kind of mottled, spotted almost, those became selected against because things like birds could see them. So very quickly, the frequency shifted from this blue pattern that we see here in the original population to the red pattern. So black was selected for. So the diversifying or disruptive selection, the last one here, we're looking at some rabbits. The Himalayan rabbit, the gray and white, those are able to blend with rocky environments. Also, well, let's look at the original population here. So the original population was mostly white, with some that were almost a dark gray, and then some that were part white and part gray. In the new environment, these guys could blend in with rocks. So could these. The white ones could not. So those guys were eaten. So the frequency of the population very quickly shifted so that the dark gray became more and more common. The gray and white became more and more common, but the white rabbits themselves, those became less and less frequent. So that's diversifying or disruptive selection.